The shot came not with urgency, but with acceptance. Maya let the wind finish its argument. She adjusted, not the scope but her expectation. The math was still there, humming beneath everything, but now it was tempered by something Ghost had tried to teach her without ever naming it. Humility. The bullet left the barrel clean. No drama, no defiance, just physics doing what it was told. Through the scope, the chemist folded backward, collapsing into shadow like a thought the world had rejected. No celebration followed. Only silence. The assault team moved. Hostages lived. No one cheered when Maya returned to base. They didn't need to. Garrett didn't say anything either. He just nodded once, the way men do when words would only cheapen the moment. Later alone, Maya cleaned her rifle again. Not because it needed it. Because rituals remind you who you are when the noise fades. She touched the dog tags under her vest. Still there. Still heavy. But no longer sharp. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. If you want, next I can. Expand this into full 6 times, till the 1,000-word completed parts, ready for narration. Adjust packing to hit exactly 50-60 minutes. Rewrite with stronger emotional pauses for voice actors. Adapt it for HFY/female sniper, YouTube narration style. Or localize language slightly, US/global audience tone. Just reply with a number, or tell me what you want next. You said. Part 2 with 1,000 plus. ChatGPT said. Why did the memory come back to her now, when she was supposed to be sleeping? Maya lay on her back in the narrow bunk, staring at the dark ceiling of the forward operating base. The generator outside hummed like a tired animal that refused to die. Somewhere far beyond the wire, gunfire cracked once, twice, then faded. The sound didn't bother her. What bothered her was the silence after it, the space where her thoughts rushed in uninvited. She closed her eyes. Kandahar came anyway. It always did. 3 years earlier, she hadn't been a sniper. She hadn't even known she wanted to be one. She'd been a combat medic, 24 years old, lean, quiet, competent. The kind of soldier commanders trusted without really seeing. Medics were supposed to patch people up, not question positioning, not think about angles or lines of sight. Their job began after the damage was done. But that day, she had seen the damage coming. The convoy had been labeled routine. That word should have set off alarms, but it never did. Routine meant shortcuts. Routine meant relaxed shoulders and loose scanning. Routine meant someone eventually paid the price. The village road was narrow, flanked by mud brick walls and rooftops that looked empty until they were. Heat shimmered off the ground, blurring distance, making everything feel farther away than it really was. Maya rode in the second vehicle, aid bag between her boots, eyes moving without conscious effort. Windows, roof lines, shadows. She didn't know why she looked so closely. She just did. Then she saw it. A flash, not bright, just wrong. Sunlight hitting glass at an angle that didn't belong to anything civilian. Her breath caught. Sniper, she said into the radio, voice sharp, cutting through chatter. Rooftop northwest, 300 meters. She expected movement, expected someone to drop, to react. Instead, Daniel Ashford turned his head. Toward her. Later, she would replay that second 1,000 times. She would wonder if she should have shouted instead of spoken, if she should have screamed his name, if there was some other sequence of sounds that could have bent time differently. But in that moment, instinct overrode logic. He heard her voice and looked for her face. The shot came before she could inhale again. It wasn't loud, not like movies made it seem. Just a heavy crack, followed by a sound she would never forget, the sound of a body hitting dirt that wasn't ready to receive it. She was moving before permission existed. Her knees hit the ground beside him, hands already tearing open fabric. Blood was everywhere, hotter than she expected, slicker than training had prepared her for. She pressed down hard, feeling life push back against her palms. "Stay with me," she said, and hated herself because she already knew. Daniel's eyes searched hers, unfocused at the edges. His grip found her wrist tight, desperate. He tried to speak. Blood filled his mouth, turning words into noise. She worked anyway, because that was her job, because giving up wasn't part of the equation. The helicopter arrived fast, faster than anyone expected. Not fast enough. He died with her hands on his chest, his pulse fatting under her fingers like something slipping through water. Afterward, people spoke to her. She nodded, answered questions, cleaned her hands, went back to work. She did not cry. Grief for her didn't arrive as tears. It arrived as calculation. That night she sat alone and replayed the moment, not emotionally but mechanically. Distance, angle, weapon type, placement, variables. If someone had been watching that rooftop, if someone had been positioned farther out, if someone had been trained for that range. She stopped herself. No ifs. Only solutions. 2 weeks later, Daniel's widow called her into an office that smelled like paper and quiet authority. Major Sarah Ashford didn't offer condolences. She offered something heavier. A letter, written before deployment, addressed to Maya. "Don't waste time on guilt," it read. "You'll try, don't, fix the problem instead." The words felt like a hand on her back, pushing her forward whether she was ready or not. When the sniper school applications were denied, again and again, she didn't argue, she adjusted. Money became training, nights became study, rest became optional. She learned ballistics the way some people learned religion, with discipline, with obsession, with the belief that understanding could save lives. Her world shrank to notebooks and ranges, to wind charts and after-action reports, to the idea that somewhere in the chaos, patterns existed, and if she found them, fewer people would die waiting for help that never came. By the time she arrived at sniper school, she was already tired. By the time she failed, she was already angry. But anger didn't sustain her, purpose did. That was why she drove into the mountains, why she knocked on a stranger's door, why she stood in front of a man who had every reason to turn her away and asked him to teach her anyway. Ghost Harrison didn't promise success. He promised truth. And truth, she learned, was harder than failure. Back in the present, Maya opened her eyes in the bunk. The base was still quiet. The memory had passed for now. She sat up slowly and rested her forearms on her knees. Her vest hung nearby, heavy with gear and history. She reached inside and touched the dog tag sewn into the lining. Cold, solid. Not a burden. A responsibility. Tomorrow they would test her again. They always did. But tonight, she reminded herself why she had chosen this path. Not to prove she belonged, not to silence doubters, not to earn a title that others guarded like inheritance. She had done it so the next warning wouldn't come too late. So the next Daniel wouldn't die, because no one was watching far enough out. Outside, the generator kept humming. Inside, Maya Thornton breathed, steady and controlled, already calculating the future, one variable at a time. Why did failure feel heavier than grief? Maya stood alone on the range long after the others had left, the late afternoon sun slanting low enough to turn dust into gold. Targets lay scattered across the distance like quiet accusations. 800 meters out, the steel plate still bore the mark of her miss, clean, undeniable, and just wide enough to matter. 7 inches. On paper it meant nothing. In reality it meant everything. Sniper school didn't erupt into shouting or humiliation when she failed. That would have been easier. Instead, it responded with indifference. A mark on a clipboard, a neutral expression, a quiet dismissal that said, "You tried, you didn't make it. Next." Maya nodded when told she was done. She packed her gear without protest. She even thanked the instructor because gratitude had become a reflex. What she didn't do was leave right away. She lay prone again, settling behind the rifle as if nothing had happened. The world narrowed to scope and breath. Wind moved across the valley in lazy, uneven waves. She felt it on her cheek, watched it tease the grass, counted the seconds between gusts. This time she adjusted. The shot rang out. Dead center. The range officer cleared his throat behind her. "Doesn't count," he said, not unkindly. "Course is over." Maya didn't argue. She cleared the chamber, stood, and slung the rifle over her shoulder. As she walked away, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not panic, not despair, but something colder. Resolve. That night she sat on her bunk and disassembled the rifle piece by piece, laying everything out with ritual precision. She didn't rush. She inspected tolerances, threads, the mount. When she found the slight shift, the near-invisible flaw that would have thrown the shot at that distance, she stared at it for a long time. It wasn't dramatic, no obvious tampering, just a screw torqued a fraction too loose. An accident, maybe. Or a reminder. She tightened it anyway, logged the discovery in her notebook, closed the book without writing what she was really thinking. If this was the cost of entry, she would pay it. Weeks passed. Her reassignment came quietly, back to a unit that needed medics more than marksmen. She did her job well, better than before. She kept her head down, her voice steady, her eyes always moving. But at night she studied. Ballistics tables replaced novels. Wind-reading videos replaced sleep. She learned to calculate without writing anything down, to estimate without tools, to feel the difference between a gust that lied and one that told the truth. Still, something was missing. Skill alone wasn't enough. She needed perspective, someone who wouldn't polish the truth or protect an institution's pride. That was how she found Ghost Harrison. He lived in the mountains where cell signals died and excuses followed. The road to his cabin was barely a road at all, more suggestion than infrastructure. Maya parked, checked the address twice, then walked the last 100 meters on foot. The door opened before she knocked. Ghost was older than she expected, lean, weathered, eyes sharp without being unkind. "You're late," he said. "I didn't give a time," Maya replied. He smiled once, briefly. "That's how I know you're serious." He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask her background. He handed her a rifle that felt wrong the moment she touched it, unbalanced, unfamiliar, imperfect. "Hit the plate," he said, pointing toward a distant slope. She adjusted instinctively. The shot went wide. Ghost didn't comment. "Again." She corrected, missed differently. "Again." By the fifth miss, frustration crept in. Not loud, just enough to tighten her jaw. "Why?" she asked finally. "Because," he said, "you're trying to control something that refuses to be controlled." He taught her without schedules, without praise, without certainty. Some days she didn't fire a single round. They watched wind, clouds, shadows, learned to see terrain as a living thing instead of a static map. "Preparation," Ghost said one morning as they sat in silence, "isn't about confidence. It's about respect. For the variables, for the unknown, for the people who pay when you get it wrong." She thought of Daniel, of the rooftop, of the fraction of a second that had changed everything. She nodded. Training with Ghost stripped her down, took away shortcuts she didn't know she was relying on, forced her to rebuild habits from the ground up. When she left months later, she didn't feel sharper. She felt quieter. Back in uniform, the quiet, unsettled people. At the next briefing, she spoke once, just enough to point out a risk others had missed. The room paused. Someone questioned her data. She didn't defend it, she just explained it. The ambush came where she said it would. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but close enough to matter. She made the first shot, and the second, the third. Then she missed. 7 inches. The wounded man lived, barely. The mission continued. Afterward, Maya sat alone on the tarmac, helmet beside her, hands resting on her knees. No one blamed her. That almost made it worse. She replayed the shot. The conditions, the timing, found the truth quickly. She hadn't waited. Not because she panicked. Because she wanted it to be over. That realization hurt more than any reprimand. That night she cleaned her rifle under a single dim light. She didn't rush. She didn't curse. She accepted the weight of the lesson. Patience wasn't passive. It was a choice. When the call came for the Ridge mission weeks later, Maya didn't volunteer. She didn't push. She simply stood when asked and met the commander's eyes. "I can do it," she said, not as a challenge, as a statement. Garrett studied her longer than necessary, then nodded. On the ridge, as cold air pressed against her lungs and the valley stretched wide and unforgiving below, Maya felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not confidence. Clarity. She lay still, letting the world move without her, letting the wind finish speaking, letting responsibility settle where ego used to live. The target would appear. She would wait. And when the moment came, she would not rush it, because some things once done could never be undone. She breathed and stayed still. Why did failure feel heavier than grief? Maya learned the answer the day the spotter beside her quietly set the rifle down and said nothing at all. No reprimand, no raised voice, just the sound of metal touching concrete and the unspoken understanding that the attempt was over. 800 meters, one round, conditions logged as stable, which meant nothing if you understood wind the way it actually behaved. It lied, it curved, it changed its mind halfway through a sentence. Maya had accounted for it, she was sure she had. Her data book was precise, her breathing had been clean, the squeeze was perfect. The shot still went wide. Not by much, barely enough to matter to anyone watching from behind the glass. But enough. That was the part that hollowed her out. Not that she missed, but that she missed by so little. Because almost was where excuses lived, and she hated excuses more than failure. They dismissed her without ceremony. Later she stood alone on the range, watching the heat rise off the earth like something alive. Other candidates talked quietly behind her. Some glanced her way. Some didn't. A few wore sympathy like armor, as if it might protect them later. She packed her gear slowly, methodically, the way medics clean tools after losing a patient. That night she sat on her bunk and stared at the wall until it stopped being a wall and became Kandahar again, became a rooftop, became a moment where a few inches had decided everything. Anger tried to take root, she felt it, let it pass. What stayed was something worse. Doubt. She didn't sleep. Instead, she took her rifle apart and put it back together until her fingers moved without instruction. On the 7th cycle, she noticed something that hadn't been there before, or maybe had, and she hadn't known how to see it. A tolerance, barely measurable, enough to shift under recoil, enough to betray precision when it mattered most. Her throat tightened. She reported it. They logged it. Nothing came of it. Sabotage required proof. Manufacturing error was easier to accept, easier to forget. Failure, however, was permanent. When the dismissal paperwork came through, she signed it without comment, walked out without looking back. She didn't cry then either. She drove, for hours, past the city, past places where people slept without knowing how fragile distance really was. She ended up at a cabin she'd only heard about in fragments. A man who trained marksmen the way surgeons trained hands. A man who'd left before politics could ruin what he believed in. Ghost Harrison opened the door and studied her like a problem that didn't yet deserve a solution. "You failed," he said. "Yes." "You'll fail again." "Yes." That earned her a nod. Training with Ghost wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, repetitive, brutally honest. He made her sit and watch wind instead of shooting, made her miss on purpose and explain why, made her carry responsibility for every round like it had a name attached to it. You don't shoot targets, he told her once, you shoot outcomes. She learned restraint, learned patience, learned that ego was the loudest enemy on the field. By the time she left, she wasn't better because she wanted to be. She was better because she understood what it cost not to be. Why did success feel lonelier than struggle? The answer came on a ridgeline she hadn't chosen. The mission briefing had been rushed, intelligence incomplete, the kind of operation that lived on borrowed certainty. Maya listened, quiet as always, eyes moving across maps and faces. She saw the gaps immediately, the places where assumptions pretended to be facts. She spoke once. They nodded, moved on. The ambush unfolded exactly where she'd marked it. Chaos has a sound, not explosions, those were punctuation. Chaos was the overlapping of voices, the sudden absence of structure, the way training scrambled to keep up with reality. Maya moved to high ground without being told, found a position that didn't feel right but was all there was. Wind was inconsistent, visibility worse. She fired anyway, not to dominate but to protect. She made the first shot count, then the second, then the third. On the fourth she hesitated. A fraction of a second, enough to let doubt whisper. The round struck flesh, but not where it needed to. A teammate went down, wounded not killed. The difference mattered, it always did, but the guilt didn't negotiate. After extraction, no one blamed her. That almost made it worse. She replayed the moment alone, dissecting it without mercy, not to punish herself, but to understand. When the call came days later, long-range, high-risk, hostages involved, Garrett looked at her differently, not with trust, with curiosity. "You ready?" he asked. Maya thought of Ghost, of Daniel, of the inches that decided fate. "I'm honest," she said. Garrett didn't smile. Neither did she. Sometimes growth isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to carry what you broke and still show up when it matters. Why did failure feel heavier than the weight of the rifle in her hands? The range was quiet in the way only professional spaces ever were, controlled, expectant, unforgiving. Maya lay prone behind the rifle, cheek pressed into the stock, breath shallow enough to keep the world still. The target was distant, a pale suggestion against the land, barely visible to the naked eye. 800 meters, one shot, one chance. She had done everything right. Her dope was precise, wind call conservative but informed, elevation calculated twice. The rifle felt familiar, like an extension of her spine rather than a tool she carried. Instructors stood behind the glass, watching, waiting for the moment where competence either held or cracked. She exhaled halfway. Pressed. The shot broke clean. Too clean. She knew before the spotter spoke. "Miss Low right." The words were neutral, procedural. They didn't need to hurt to wound. Maya stayed in position longer than required, eyes still through the scope, heart beating slower than it should have. She watched the dust settle where the round had struck, 7 inches off. Not catastrophic, not dramatic, just enough to be unacceptable. 7 inches meant a warning instead of a stop. 7 inches meant a second chance for the wrong person. She rolled onto her side, eyes up, waiting for correction, for instruction, for something she could fix. None came. The instructors scribbled notes. One of them shook his head almost imperceptibly, like the conclusion had already been reached. That night she sat alone in the armory long after lights out, rifle stripped to its bones. Piece by piece she inspected everything again. Bolt, trigger, barrel, scope, mount. There, barely perceptible, a tolerance shift so small it would escape anyone not looking for betrayal. The mount had loosened just enough under recoil to steal her precision. She stared at it for a long time. Sabotage was a word no one used aloud, not because it was rare, but because it was inconvenient, proving it would take time, politics, and the willingness to admit that training grounds were not neutral places. She said nothing. Failure officially was hers. The next morning she was dismissed without ceremony. No cruelty, no apology, just a quiet understanding that she would not be moving forward. She drove for hours afterward without music, without destination. Anger rose and fell in waves but never broke. Anger required somewhere to land, and she had nowhere to put it. By the time the mountains rose in front of her, the sun was already low. The cabin wasn't marked. It didn't need to be. The man who lived there hadn't trained anyone in years. His name wasn't on rosters. His reputation survived only in stories told by men who didn't embellish because they didn't need to. Ghost Harrison opened the door without surprise. "You're late," he said, as if she had always been expected. She didn't explain. She didn't justify. She told him exactly why she was there. "I missed," she said, "and I can't afford to again." He studied her for a long moment, eyes sharp but not unkind. "Good," he replied, "then you might listen." Training with Ghost was nothing like the courses she'd known. No ranks, no clocks, no audience, just terrain, weather, and repetition stripped of comfort. He taught her how wind lied, how terrain breathed, how ego crept in when fatigue arrived. He made her shoot tired, hungry, cold, distracted. He changed variables without warning, took away equipment, forced her to adapt rather than insist. "Preparation," he told her once as they lay watching clouds roll over a valley, "isn't control, it's humility. You prepare because you don't deserve certainty." She failed constantly, but the failures made sense. And slowly, quietly she learned. When she left the mountains, she wasn't sharper. She was steadier. Back on deployment, the ambush came exactly where she said it would. They hadn't repositioned, hadn't extended Overwatch. Habit had outweighed caution. The explosion was violent but brief. Chaos followed, screams, orders overlapping. Maya was already moving. She took positions that hadn't been assigned, fired only when she was sure. She eliminated threats without announcing herself, without waiting for validation. Then she missed. 7 inches again. The round struck stone instead of flesh. The man moved. A teammate went down. The scream cut through everything. She adjusted instantly, fired again. This time there was no question. Later, as medics worked and helicopters circled, Maya sat apart from the noise. She didn't flinch when someone shouted, didn't react when someone slammed a fist into a wall. The failure belonged to her. Not because she was careless, but because responsibility didn't care about reasons. That night she wrote everything down, every variable, every choice, every moment where doubt had slowed her hand. She didn't punish herself. She corrected. When the call came weeks later, classified, deliberate, heavy with implication, she didn't feel ready. She felt necessary. The mission required patience more than aggression, precision more than presence, a shot that might not come at all. The ridge was high, exposed, alive with wind that shifted without warning. 900 meters. Beyond doctrine. She lay still for over an hour, listening to the land argue with itself. When the target finally appeared, she didn't rush. Because lives waited on the other side of the trigger. And for the first time since Kandahar, Maya didn't think about what she needed to prove. She thought only about what she was responsible for. Sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes it waits. What does it feel like when the moment you trained for finally arrives, and it's quieter than you expected? Maya felt it before she saw it, a shift in the air, not wind, intention. The ridge had been silent for so long it felt unreal, like a held breath that refused to release. She lay prone against cold stone, rifle settled into her shoulder as if it belonged there. The scope showed her a world narrowed to a rectangle of muted color and patient waiting. Below, the compound slept uneasily. Guards rotated with lazy confidence. Lights flickered where generators strained. Somewhere inside, people were being held not by chains, but by uncertainty, by the knowledge that help might never come. Her spotter whispered numbers, barely audible, more ritual than necessity. Maya acknowledged without turning her head. She trusted him. But more than that, she trusted the hours she'd spent here already, learning the rhythm of this place. Places always had one if you listened long enough. Her mind tried to wander. She didn't let it. Fear wasn't loud at moments like this. It didn't scream or shake. It crept in softly, asking small questions. What if you misread the wind? What if the glass lies? What if today is the day you're wrong? She answered them the only way she knew how. By staying. The target emerged without drama. No grand entrance. Just a man stepping into open space, unaware of how many lives balanced on his next breath. Maya watched him through the scope and felt something unexpected rise in her chest. Not hatred, not anger. Clarity. She waited, not because she hesitated, but because timing mattered more than skill. She remembered Ghost's voice, low and unforgiving. You don't take the shot when you're ready. You take it when the world is. The radio crackled, a question, a subtle push to act. She didn't respond. Seconds stretched. Somewhere far away, a child cried. The sound reached her like a ghost of a ghost, thin and fleeting. Maya adjusted her breathing, slow and deliberate, letting the rifle become an extension of her stillness rather than an interruption. Then the world aligned. She pressed the trigger. The recoil was familiar, comforting even. The result was immediate, final, uncelebrated. The man fell out of frame, and the silence that followed was heavier than the one before. The assault team moved in with precision. Maya tracked the perimeter, scanning for retaliation, for chaos, for anything that might demand another decision. Nothing came. The compound unraveled quietly, like a lie exposed without argument. When it was over, she stayed in position. That was her habit. Finish the job, don't rush the ending. Only when she was told to stand down did she finally lower the rifle. Her muscles protested as she shifted, reminding her that stillness had a cost. She welcomed the ache. It meant she was still here. Back at base, the debrief was short, efficient. Numbers were exchanged, timelines confirmed, success noted in language stripped of emotion. Maya listened, answered when asked, said nothing more. Garrett watched her from across the room. He didn't approach her afterward, didn't offer praise or apology, just met her eyes briefly and nodded once. It was enough, not because she needed his approval, but because she recognized the weight behind it. Respect earned without ceremony was the kind that lasted. Later, alone, she cleaned her rifle again. The routine grounded her: patch through barrel, wipe down the bolt, inspect the scope. Each movement deliberate, unhurried. This time her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from release, the body letting go of what it had held tight. She thought of Daniel, of the way his grip had tightened on her wrist, as if trying to anchor himself to the world through her. She thought of Ghost, standing in the cold mountain air, telling her truths she hadn't wanted but had needed. She thought of every moment she'd been underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. None of it felt sharp anymore. Just present. The base settled into night. Conversations softened. Laughter appeared where tension had lived hours earlier. Life, stubborn and ordinary, resumed its place. Maya stepped outside and looked up. The sky was clear. Stars scattered without pattern or promise. She breathed in deeply, the cool air filling her lungs, steadying her heart. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel something close to peace. Not pride. Not relief. Acceptance. She knew there would be other missions, Other nights like this. Other moments when doubt would try to speak louder than preparation. She knew mistakes were still possible, that loss was never fully avoidable. But she also knew this. She had chosen a path that asked more of her than recognition ever could. A path where dignity wasn't declared but demonstrated, where strength wasn't loud but reliable. Inside her vest, the dog tags rested against her chest. Still heavy, still real, but no longer a wound. As she turned back toward the light of the base, Maya understood something she hadn't before. That redemption wasn't about erasing the past or proving anything to anyone. It was about showing up, again and again, quietly prepared to do what needed to be done, even when no one was watching. Sometimes courage doesn't shout. Sometimes it lies still, waits for the wind to finish its argument, and acts when the moment finally asks for it. And sometimes that is enough.